New Year's Eve, 1931. I'm Indy Nidell, and welcome. You've probably noticed right away that this is not our usual format. That is true. We had to change our format because of all the violence in the streets here in 1931. Our offices were attacked. Twice. So we've gone underground. I will still be broadcasting, though, but from a secret location, and I will now cover events every 3 months. This is the autumn 1931 edition, covering October, November, and December. You may wonder who attacked our offices. The communists, the Nazis, heck, the Stahlhelm. Who? Well, we do not know. I'm sure our blunt coverage of German events has made more than one group angry. But at least when it comes to this kind of violence, I am reminded of the words of former French Prime Minister Aristide Briand. Have you noticed how much the National Socialists, the Nazis, and the Communists are alike? You only need to listen to their speeches. Their arguments are so much alike that you have to wait until the end to see whether the crowd gives straight-arm salutes or raises clenched fists. This autumn, though, we get a look at what the Nazis might do if they ever gain power. So as 1931 comes to an end, how does it look for the German people when they look back? I mean, we are now in a global depression. The year 1931 was a year of growing economic crisis. The small business sector suffered badly, with retail sales falling by 30%, while bankruptcies grew by 20%. On the 8th of January, the number of unemployed people rose to 4.5 million music, and would rise even more to 6 million by the end of the year, forcing the government to adopt more and more severe austerity measures. Heinrich Brüning, the German chancellor, cared little about public opinion as he pushed his economic policies, believing that cuts in public spending and a lower standard of living were the necessary medicine to reach a balanced budget. As we have seen, though, one person who has really benefited from all this economic pain is Adolf Hitler, and so has the Nazi movement. At the beginning of 1931, they had 389,000 members. As the year ends, they have 806,294. That is more than double. As for Chancellor Brüning, his popularity has reached new lows. President Paul von Hindenburg is frustrated by how often Brüning issues emergency decrees, which are also in the president's name and are always controversial. He wants a shake-up in the Brüning government, one that will include the two loudly nationalist parties, the right-wing DNVP and the extremist NSDAP, the Nazis. This is something Brüning has firmly refused to do. Hindenburg has a top advisor. Behind the scenes, Kurt von Schleicher, who has also grown frustrated with Brüning and wants him gone. He has been undermining Brüning behind the scenes to the point that there have been times when Hindenburg has been close to simply removing Brüning from the chancellorship. Both Schleicher and Hindenburg were telling Brüning to rebuild his cabinet and move it to the right. It was clear to Brüning that their trust in him was failing, and relations only got worse. Brüning suggested that Hindenburg meet with Hitler. The president was outraged. He objected not to Hitler's politics, but rather to his military rank, social standing, and probably national background. "I really cannot be made to talk with this Austrian private," Hindenburg told Brüning. He felt he was being asked to give up too much of his personal feelings and beliefs. Brüning said he had never before heard this tone of voice from Hindenburg. But Schleicher has not only been working behind the scenes. Already in September, believing that Hitler could no longer be dismissed as a sideshow and had to be seen. As a serious politician, he advised Brüning to reshuffle his cabinet, not just with more nationalist party representation, but also by giving Hitler a post which would tame him. Schleicher also thought an alliance between the conservative elite and Hitler would give popular legitimacy to a far-reaching revision of Germany's constitution in a more authoritarian direction. In reply, Brüning told Schleicher it would be a crime to violate the constitution when, through his secret pact of toleration with the Social Democrats, he enjoyed a Reichstag majority in the event of no-confidence votes. There is another man in the mix now, a man who supports this taming Hitler idea, Franz von Papen. And who is this man? Well, if you had asked the U.S. that question during the Great War, they called him the devil in a top hat. He had been a military attaché in Washington, D.C., but was charged with sabotage and thrown out of the country after taking part in very illegal espionage. There is more to him than that, though. He comes from Westphalian Catholic nobility and married into even greater wealth than the large fortune he already had. He was an officer in the German Imperial Army, and after being thrown out of the States, he commanded troops on the Western Front and later on the Palestine Front. After the war, he was in the Prussian parliament and became part owner of the Center Party newspaper Germania. He has at times argued for the return of the monarchy and is well known for his anti-socialist, anti-republican speeches in the Prussian Landtag, the state parliament. He matters right now because Schleicher has brought him into Hindenburg's inner circle, thinking that von Papen might be just the right man to replace Brüning as chancellor, not only because of his views, but because he seems quite easy to control. Here is a description of von Papen by a French ambassador. Papen is, to some extent, the butt of other people's jokes. They mock him without mercy, though he takes it all in good humor. He's a favorite of the field marshal. His lively spirit and cheerfulness help distract the old man. He flatters him with his respect and devotion. Well, Schleicher gives von Papen the mission of convincing Brüning that this Hitler taming strategy is a good idea. Already back in September, Papen met with Brüning and the Center Party's richest donor, Peter Kluckner, to get Brüning to make a deal with Hitler to extend Hindenburg's term as president, thus avoiding the coming spring elections. Brüning was simply not interested. Then, on October 2nd, in a big speech, von Papen demands that Brüning establish a, quote, dictatorship on a nationalist basis, unquote, that would end the parliamentary system and bring the DNVP and the Nazis into the government. The next day, Schleicher meets with Hitler. Hitler says he would personally enter the government on the condition that they hold fresh elections and the Nazis get to form the government. Schleicher gets the idea that Hitler is sincere about seeking power through legal means, as he has said many times. So Schleicher manages to convince Hindenburg to meet with Hitler. There are a lot of political moves going on here. Schleicher has, of course, advised Brüning that the best way for him to govern, if he cannot get a working majority, is to just dissolve the Reichstag for an unlimited time. Brüning has already decided to make a small reshuffling of his cabinet to hopefully please Hindenburg. So this is what he does on October 6th. He issues the third emergency decree for the protection of the economy and finances. These decrees are technically presidential decrees, which are allowed under Article 48 of the Weimar Constitution. This one gives the police more power to control the now common riots, cuts down the amount of time people can receive unemployment, insurance, and lowers the pension for government workers from 80% of final salary to 75%. Then, that same day, Brüning and his whole cabinet resign. Foreign Minister Julius Curtius had actually already done so on the 3rd, after the failure of the German-Austrian customs union that we recently saw. Hindenburg asks Brüning to form a new government, one with no political commitments to any party. It is to be a presidential cabinet with no formal coalition agreement, relying on Hindenburg and Brüning to rule by decree under Article 48. On the 9th, Brüning sets up the new government, which is not all that different from the last one. To be honest, Brüning gives himself the role of foreign minister in addition to chancellor. Wilhelm Groener, an independent, replaces the Center Party's Joseph Wirth as Minister of the Interior. Groener is already defense minister, though, and that does not change. So he now has both the army and the police under his control. There are a couple of other new faces, and this cabinet does have a smaller support base in the Reichstag than before. Adolf Hitler declares that this new cabinet is just as unrepresentative of the people's will as the last one. Brüning actually meets with Hitler the next day, October 10th, and does as von Papen wished, ask Adolf how he feels about a constitutional amendment that would allow Hindenburg to remain in office as president without a new election. Hitler says he is against that. That same day, Hitler, for the first time, meets President Paul von Hindenburg in person. Hitler has Hermann Göring with him, a Nazi Party member of parliament. During the meeting, Hitler stressed his own respect for the president before giving a long speech about the failure of the Weimar political system. It was reported that Hindenburg was not overly impressed by the Bohemian corporal at this meeting, telling Schleicher that he found Hitler uncouth and unsuited to the role of chancellor. This is not, however, the whole story. Hindenburg told Kurt von Arnim, one of his old army comrades, that he found Hitler very appealing during this meeting. In a letter to his daughter on the 14th of October, Hindenburg also did not rule out bringing Hitler into the government if he moderated his behavior. Brüning thinks this meeting is a mistake by Hindenburg because he believes it will convince high-ranking army officers, and Hindenburg, of course, is the most legendary German officer of all, to see Hitler as a legitimate candidate for power. Music. Then, on October 11th, the very next day, the so-called National Opposition meets in Bad Harzburg. This is a group of right-wing organizations, the DNVP, the Nazis, the Stahlhelm, the Pan-German League, and so on. The purpose of this gathering is to try to unite these men into a Harzburg front, a union of right-wing groups who want to bring down the Brüning government. There are military parades, and Alfred Hugenberg of the DNVP opens the meeting with an angry speech against the Red Danger and cultural Bolshevism. Hitler speaks as well, saying that the whole German political structure must be rebuilt from the ground up, and that either Marxism or nationalism will be the winner in Germany, one or the other. Former National Bank President Hjalmar Schacht calls Hitler Germany's last hope for order and decency. He also says the National Bank is purposely hiding how truly serious the country's financial position is in order to support the Brüning government. I should point out that although many business leaders and captains of industry have been invited to Bad Harzburg for this, they do not attend. In Berlin, Brüning presides over the first session of the Reichstag since March on October 13th. And the DNVP and the Nazis immediately present a motion of no confidence in Brüning's government. This is defeated by a margin that is not all that large after 3 days of debate. Then, for real, the Reichstag votes to adjourn until next February, and Brüning will rule by issuing presidential decrees. But he says, okay, the parliamentary system will come back once the economic crisis is over. Don't you worry. November has its fair share of drama as well. On the 15th, in the Hesse state elections, the Nazis win 37.4% of the vote, becoming the largest party there. And it is kind of clear that if there were national elections soon, Hitler and the Nazis would likely do very well. But then something happens in Hesse that alarms a lot of people. On November 25th, Karl Severing, Prussian Minister of the Interior, announces that a member of the Hessian parliament, one Dr. Wilhelm Schäfer, who was forced to leave his office because his claim of holding a doctorate turned out to be false, has turned over some explosive documents to the local police. What sort of documents, you ask? Nazi Party documents prepared by a lawyer named Werner Best, which contain the minutes of a meeting of regional Nazi Party leaders at Boxheimer Hof near Lampertheim in Hesse. There have been several such meetings there over the past few months. Now, it was Best, a Nazi, who made Schäfer, also a Nazi, resign from the Landtag for lying on his resume, with the result that Schäfer, who had attended a couple of Boxheim meetings, pulled away from the Nazi Party and handed over the documents. They very clearly lay out the local party's plans if there were a communist coup in Hesse. First, the SA, the Nazi Party paramilitary organization, would crush the communists and then use armed force in brutal revenge. Armed Nazi groups would have unlimited executive authority, and all political opponents would be rounded up and put into camps. Anyone who resisted any new decree would be shot dead on the spot, and all residents would have 24 hours to hand over any weapons or be executed. All food supplies would be seized and stored, and the sale or exchange of food would be banned. There would be compulsory work service for all Germans over the age of 16, and food would be given out based on fulfilling this duty of service. Since Jews would not be allowed to work, they would get no food. The Boxheim papers, as they are known, shock the nation when all of this becomes public. Well, not just the nation. This causes a bit of an international stir. I should point out that Severing and Wilhelm Leuschner, the former Hessian Minister of the Interior, are both committed Social Democrats and have for some time wanted to prosecute the Nazi Party for treason. Leuschner has often found himself at odds with Best in the Landtag, and these papers prepared by Best seem to be a way to prove the dishonest and illegal nature of the Nazi Party, a brutal dictatorship that would appear if Hitler ever came to power. They are certainly embarrassing. For Hitler, on the 26th, Hermann Göring issues a press release saying that the Nazi Party leadership has absolutely nothing to do with these disturbing papers, and they are certainly not the views of the leadership. No, sir. The Reich Ministry of Justice looks at the case and says, however, that the documents are not the basis of treason, since treason would mean the intention of overthrowing the government, and this is a reaction to someone else doing so. Hitler himself steps in during December, giving several interviews and declaring that he has no intention whatsoever of overthrowing the government, either local or national. On the 4th, he holds an international press conference in Berlin and is quoted as saying, "It will not be necessary for me to seize power in a coup d'état. It will be mine within a short time anyway, since every election brings my party closer to power." He tells the New York Times, "The National Socialist movement will win power in Germany by methods permitted by the present constitution in a purely legal way." To the London Times, he plays down the Boxheim papers as insignificant and irrelevant. And in the Nazi Party newspaper Völkischer Beobachter, he has a two-part message to the American people on December 13th and 14th, in which he says he wants peace for Germany and all of Europe, and that his movement is not one of desperation, but one of hope. Dorothy Thompson, the American journalist who meets Hitler in person for the first time in November, has been told by him personally that he will only take power legally, but then abolish the Weimar Parliament and Constitution after that. But she does not see it happening. She recognizes the anti-Semitic mania without which the Nazis' whole party platform would fall apart. But she also sees that neither Hitler himself nor Goebbels belongs to that elite group of Aryans, the Nordics, and doubts whether the drummer, boy, as she calls Hitler, will ever win over the German people with these lies. But has she herself not read what Hitler wrote in Mein Kampf? The broad masses themselves often tell small lies in little matters, but would be ashamed to resort to large-scale falsehoods. It would never enter their heads to invent colossal untruths, and they would not believe that others could have the shamelessness to twist the truth so infamously. Chancellor Brüning is pushed into action by the Boxheim papers, and he has this to say in a radio broadcast on December 8th. The leader of the National Socialists has emphasized the legal methods and goals of his political intentions. Nevertheless, one cannot ignore the sharp contrast to these assurances shown by the violent claims of no less responsible leaders of this same party, who continue to stir Germans toward senseless civil war and diplomatic foolishness. When one declares that one intends to break down legal barriers once one has come to power by legal means, then one is no longer observing legality, especially if secret plans are at the same time being made for revenge. That is not all Brüning has to say during that broadcast, however, for he also announces a fourth emergency decree for securing the economy and finances, and for the purpose of controlling political riots. The decree itself is 48 pages long, but here are a few of the high points. Salaries of government employees are lowered by 9%. Interest rates are lowered by 1% to 6%, and there is to be no more government assistance for residential building. There is to be a new commissioner for price controls and a 25% tax on what the decree calls national deserters, meaning German citizens who have sold German assets to escape German taxes. Schweitig. This decree is not very popular, but do you know who is popular? Erich Jan Hanussen is the famous mentalist, hypnotist, and clairvoyant. By this point, Hanussen is a real star, and he is also a loyal Nazi Party member, having even converted from Judaism to Protestantism. Now, in October, while in a trance, he dictates a novel he would like to see published, called SOS, onto wax cylinders. But what people are talking about is what he has already published. In 7 installments, the Berlin Illustrated Evening Edition has published the transcript of a session in which Hanussen answers questions about the future, about a trip to New York in the year 2500. He says from his trance, "Where New York once stood, there is now sea. I do not know the date when it happened, but there was a terrible catastrophe. The whole city was submerged during this catastrophe. Everyone perished, ships, people, houses. Yes, the buildings collapsed like a house of cards." A little later on, Hanussen does give a precise date for the destruction of New York, the year 2000. And what about Berlin? What will that city look like in 2500? "It is not a city," comes the seer's brisk reply. "It is a country stretching far and wide. Gardens, happy people live here. Contented people. That sounds nice." Well, not for New Yorkers, but Berlin in 1931 is anything but happy and contented, as we have seen over the months, and the levels of aggression and confrontation in the streets seem to grow every time there is an election. Hanussen, though, seems pretty happy and contented, and is now famous throughout Europe, and it is pretty obvious who he supports. The front mudguard of his luxury Italian car proudly displays the standard of the SA whenever he lends the vehicle to friends in the party. His secretary, his assistant, his chauffeur, and his manager Every last one of them is a National Socialist. Hannesen buys the services of the SA by giving them money to pay for boots, uniforms, and food, as well as free tickets to his shows. In return, the stormtroopers protect his performances from troublemakers. Eventually, as a supporting member of the SA, his secretary recalls, "The magician starts wearing the uniform of the Sturmabteilung himself, now and then in the office or on the street." This, too, music, helps give some real legitimacy. 2. The Nazi movement. This ringing endorsement from an internationally known celebrity. And here are 2 notes about other internationally known celebrities to end this quarter. On October 24th, in Chicago, Al Capone is sentenced to 11 years in prison for tax evasion. And on November 20th, in Spain, King Alfonso III is found guilty of high treason and breach of the Constitution by the Spanish Parliament. On December 9th, a new Republican Constitution is introduced. And so the year comes to an end. And tonight, 1931 will turn into 1932. One can only hope it is a less turbulent year for the people of Germany, with much less economic hardship. President Hindenburg gives a national radio broadcast to his people on New Year's Eve, saying, "Germans deserve thanks and praise for the sacrifices they have made and the patience, music, with which they have borne their sufferings and burdens. The greatness of their sacrifice justifies Germany's demand that foreign countries should not try to block Germany's recovery through the placing of impossible conditions." The broadcast is interrupted, however, by a group of communists bursting into the studio. One shouts out over the airwaves, "Attention Germany, Red fighters are here." A less turbulent year in 1932. Well, this does not give much hope for that. But whatever does happen, I will be here to cover it. And that is thanks to the Army. Since you enjoy all of our different productions so much, you should join us at timego.tv or patreon.com. That will help make sure we are able to continue our productions, whatever the world of 2026 may bring. Excelsior.